I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners, the Eora Nation, the Pamplin clan, and pay my respect to the elders past, present and emerging. To my fellow Indigenous people from overseas, welcome. It's a very special time. I've chosen to present Chasing Aboriginal Holy Grail, and it's something that eludes us. It's something that I've spent over 40 years pursuing, and I will try to encapsulate in the next little while some of that history, some of that background, and some of how it relates to philosophy. I must say I'm not a philosopher in a technical sense or academic sense. So what I will be giving you is an encapsulation of what it is. It is a little self-indulgent in terms of me explaining where I'm at and how my philosophy on education emerged. And it's an interesting history, I think. Chasing the Holy Grail. I need to talk about something that probably will set this up, and it's something that came to me this morning. And I've got lots of narrative, lots of stories about it, but I've led a very rich life. I've been surrounded by wonderful people. But in the early 80s, we were doing a strategic planning process with the Aboriginal Education Consultative Group, a group of about 150 people at a conference in a place called Valor Beach, which is on the north coast of New South Wales. We often went there as a group to workshop. And I run the worst workshop I've ever run in my life, because we were doing, and strategic planning was only relatively new in those days, so I'm going back to the 80s. And I had the task of moving the organisation into some sort of strategic planning. It was a disaster. And when I sat back and looked why it was a disaster, I realised we have many nations who have built their culture on dreaming. Yet what colonialism has done is taken away that dreaming. That group didn't have the capacity to think ahead of what they were going to do tomorrow. They were too busy worried about what they're going to put, what food they're going to put on the table tonight. So they couldn't do it. In many of my stories, there is a silver lining in the cloud. Interestingly enough, we held the workshop couple of months later, and it was a resounding success. They'd had time to digest the fact that we needed to plan for the future, and they started back in their dreaming and started that gift and the philosophy associated with it. I'm pleased to say that as a result of that and the silver lining in the cloud, the then Minister for Education, Paul Lander, came away and we'd set up our priorities from the strategic plan. Paul Lander came back from a cabinet meeting angry, and he was a guy that swore profusely. And he was a good guy. And he come back into his office in Bridge Street and said, I'm sick of this, and nothing works, I can't get anything done. Tell me something I can do that's positive. And fortunately for us, Jane Hyde, who was one of his assistant secretaries at that stage, said, the ACG has just set up a list of priorities. Number one on that priority list was 60 Aboriginal teaching assistants. And he said, do it. And that was good and wonderful, and how things happened by chance. But it caused calamity in the department because it was the first time that the state, since the 67 referendum, had agreed to fund Aboriginal education. And the then Director General, Doug Swan, was tearing his hair out. How are we going to fund this? It's against the policy, whatever. But it happened. And I rest this talk on the fact that Aboriginal people did get back their dreaming and did get some result out of it. But we're a long way from that process. The abstract is, I will try to address our Aboriginal children continue to be failed by the education system. I've got a couple of statements that will support that out. And the systems have only achieved third world outcomes. I used to run a subject in a master's degree in education, first world policy, third world outcomes. And that's Australia. And finally, in doing a review in 2004, I found out at the end of the review, of all the senior bureaucrats that I interviewed, none of them held responsibility for Aboriginal affairs. Yet it was a lead direction that we were heading in. No one claimed ownership because they didn't want to accept the problems associated with it. In speaking to you today, I stand on the shoulders of 65,000 years of history and background. No one else has got that background. And a Maori leader once in Hawaii said, you know, we have a history that goes back and back and back. Now, with that great history, I also wish to acknowledge Mariga Peda, who has passed on. But she spoke to this group several years ago, and it's on her shoulders too that I stand. I'm supported, and you will see with this self-indulgence a lot of community support that I bring, and I also bring to you a level of buoyed understanding that, and family will be an integral part of what we talk about here today, but buoyed by the fact that I'm a great-grandfather last week. All right, for those from overseas, that's the Aboriginal nations. And when we talk about doing things, that's the group that we've got to deal with. And they're the diversity of Aboriginal people from different cultures and backgrounds. We do a great pan-Aboriginal environment where we talk about the Aborigines. Well, there ain't one Aborigines, there's plenty. We don't have the luxury of Māori making decisions about a single entity in terms of language. We have hundreds of languages and nations that we need to be obviously aware of. Again, for our international positioning, a lot of people think that Aboriginal people exist, and the largest numbers exist in the Northern Territory. These are the people who hold an ideology that Aboriginal life is stagnant and only traditionally based. This talk today will clearly talk about that not being the fact. And if you look at that, the dark blue symbol down the coast is where the majority of Aboriginal people live. And if you wonder how important this is for an international conference, a national and international conference, I talk primarily about New South Wales, but New South Wales has a population of 216,000, and it's the largest Aboriginal population. More than 50% of the total Aboriginal population in Australia rests between Queensland and New South Wales. These figures will talk to you about urban areas. About 80% of all Aboriginal people live in urban areas, but the policy, direction, framework, mentality always talks about traditional Aboriginal people. Now, the real challenge at the end of this talk will be to talk to you about the philosophy that we need to develop, and in particular about indigenisation. I won't go on about the educational policies and etc., but they talk about self-determination. And no matter how far you go back or how current you want to come, they basically haven't changed. And for you guys, in terms of your academic backgrounds, it was certainly dealt in equity and equality. And quite clearly, that's the position. So outcomes are equitable. And the other second part to that is that in education philosophy, we want all Australians to learn about Aboriginal people and our history and background, but the true background and history. Now, I'm going to try to do something here that I've never done before, and that's try to weave. And if you plait, I think generally 3 areas, and you plait, well, I'm trying to plait. And basically, I want to talk about Aboriginal philosophical sets of circumstances, historical and personal philosophy, my own, right? That's why it's a bit self-indulgent. But you will see how my philosophy, I've had the luxury of being able to dream, and my philosophy moving forward. For those that are overseas, I cannot talk about my people without talking about history. The depth of history that we've got, we're coming to terms with the Ice Age, or a process of massive climatic change. Aboriginal people lived throughout it. So we existed when the last major climatic change happened, and we survived. There's lots to be learnt from my culture. If you look down The personal philosophy, I've highlighted down the bottom in red some critical things. And these four come from primarily a piece of research that I did for my master's degree, and following the journey of me as the first Aboriginal TAFE principal in Australia, which was a daunting task. But I try to weave that, and you'll see that. You can't talk about history without talking about things like the Frontier War, invasion, massacres. Can anyone got an idea when the last massacre occurred in Australia? Not so long ago. Well done. Yes, and it was at Coniston in the Northern Territory, right? The most famous massacre was, you probably know that one too. Oh, I caught you out. Good. Mile Creek Massacre, right? And that's where non-Aboriginal people were convicted. Not the right people, the poor ones of the group that did the massacre. Not Denga, who was a great... And if you come from Newcastle, there's Denga Park and all sorts of things named after him. Anyway, I need to move quickly. So I tried to do this weave. I don't know how successful I am, but we'll see what happens. To start the personal and professional, I personally am very lucky that I had a father who was Aboriginal that was in the Second World War, and he set me up for these things. So your amazing history of looking back at me, forgot to mention that I was a school captain, probably one of the first Aboriginal school captains in New South Wales. And this is just a little snippet from the Getting to Know Your School Captain's Advice in 1972. I was born in Sydney and spent most of my year living in most of my early life living in Redfern. I'll move down a bit. My sporting interest and sport played a big part in me moving forward, particularly playing rugby league and rugby union, where I got blues and honours blues when I went to Teachers College and played first grade rugby in Sydney. The most memorable day of my school life was when I was elected school captain. And now all I hope is I'm able to live up to the high standards set by previous school captains. When I leave school, I would like to pursue a career in teaching, either primary or secondary. So, weaving again, that's my background. I had ambition and I chose to move into teaching because it could help my people. You can't do Aboriginal studies any good without referring to your family. And as I said, my father, I've put a yellow halo over and a red one and a yellow one, is there, and he's there with Seth Patton and other dominant Aboriginal leaders of the time. So he was part of the movement. My father, and on the other side of a float for the march, the regular march, he's holding an all black sign, but he was also a returned soldier from Papua New Guinea, and he had the misfortune of coming back as a returned soldier, not being able to drink in a hotel, and not be able to join the RSL, Returned Soldiers League, right? So he had those sorts of prime battles. So my genealogy is pretty good. My mother's non-Aboriginal, and I don't have that same sense of her culture and background, although she was an amazing woman. And if anyone, anywhere, spoke up against Aboriginal people, she would tear them to shreds. I've only come across this photo in the middle, and that's 5 generations of my family. The lady standing up the back on the right with the short hair is my great-grandmother. I unfortunately never got to know her, but that's the background. The lady sitting at the very front, the very dark lady, staunch, on your left-hand side, is Sarah Madu, and she was a dominant Aboriginal person of our family background, an amazing woman. We won't go over this. I just thought I'd throw down a few things. I had to omit the TAFE part. But yes, I have been involved in lots and lots of activities, and there's not much that went on in Aboriginal education that I wasn't a part of. As I said, I've been part of school teaching. I've been head of the Aboriginal unit when we wrote the policy. I moved on to head of the TAFE unit, became principal of TAFE, and then later Professor of Aboriginal Studies at Newcastle. Why do Aboriginal kids switch off school is my PhD. And I will talk a little bit about that because it helps shape where we're at. Aboriginal peoples are from Mother's Earth. Most non-Aboriginals are from Pluto. Productive educational relationships demand cross-cultural understanding embedded in Mother Earth. So we can't lose the fact that we exist in Mother Earth. And, it's coming too late, but the rest of society are finally working out that fact. The most important thing is the building respect. So I'm also an elder in our community, and you'll see a slide I'll mention that will depict that. I'm a lifetime member of the AECG, the credentials you've been talked about. I'm involved, and my PhD was community-driven research. So instead of me dreaming up a topic and going and studying it, I actually responded to a community need. They came and said, our kids are failing. What's happening? And working with community, I designed my research around that. One of the critical factors of me travelling across Australia in various roles is the Aboriginal community would always roll out their preschool kids, young black kids, and there's no better picture than seeing a young black kid dance. And they'd come away and they'd be extremely proud and a great sense of pride. They had culture, they had background, they were learning language. I don't know how many times I've heard head, shoulders, knees and toes in hundreds of languages, but that was part of the process. And it became very important. And to the degree, and to my perception is, how can these wonderful kids go to school and lose all that? And the research indicated that within 5 years of schooling, most Aboriginal kids have switched off school. Right? They no longer have the right to dream about occupations, jobs, all those sorts of things. And just to give you a quick rundown, the examiners thought that the PhD was pretty good. Right? Best in decades, those sorts of things, but we need not dwell on that. This next one's some fun photos of me and my role. That's me receiving the PhD. The one over the other side is receiving the Davis Award for the Best Education PhD in 2016. And the one in the middle, hot off the press last week at the Opera House, winning that Nenga Meyer Award. That was much appreciated because I'd established the award 17 years ago. And in reality, we need the luxury to celebrate success. And Nenga Meyer was a way of doing that. And fellow recipients for other awards, mainly children, at that awards proved that there is still lots of positive stuff that can happen. There's never been a doubt that some teachers can get results. Amazing teachers. They've always done it. The sad part is, and I'll pick it up in a minute, the systemic issue. The really sad part is we continue to fail. And back in 2019, the head of HACARA made this statement. If the current rates of growth were to continue, we wouldn't see a closing of the literacy gap until sometime next century. Now, I will go to my grave without this job complete. I've spent my whole life trying to get that equity that we required. I will fail. And a sad part about that is that I still don't see the semblances, and statements like this are clear indicators that what schools are doing, the system is doing, is not succeeding. I told you it was a result of the research that I did for the PhD, and the title was Why Aboriginal Kids Switch Off School. When does this happen, and what can we encourage this? How can we encourage their success? The key informants and data were drawn from educational systems, drilling down to regional level schools and their staff and the Indigenous parents and communities, and also children. So I followed them over a longitudinal 4 years and looked at 2 cohorts of kids, one starting in stage 3 and the other one starting in stage 4 and finishing. I've talked about most of this, and national testing, and no matter where you look, Aboriginal results are not really good. I took on Colin Burke, a famous Aboriginal researcher and writer, and basically he said we really need to look at the systemic, the school, the community and the student, which I undertook during that process. And I made a comment here, we need to remove, this laptop wants to go walkabout, remove the educational Aboriginal lottery. People like me, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, I wish more Aboriginal people were like you. I said, no, because I'm a freak. I've got through a system that wasn't designed to get me through. I'm not a role model. I'm anti that. I'm somebody who happened to survive the system. Talked about first world practice and policy, and we talked about policies before, but we're chasing the wrong goals and strategies based on misinformation or lack of statistical information to back up the direction. Example, attendance and suspensions. Aboriginal people still today, even though the research was done several years ago, still take up large amounts of non-attendance and suspensions in schools. And it's primarily because they've switched off or they haven't switched on in the first place. And it becomes very deficit proving. Blame the victim. You know, if we, as in the closing the gap, one of the biggest goals that they were after was getting Aboriginal kids to school more often. Even some of my peers in the late 70s penned an article in one of the newspapers saying, if we could only get Aboriginal kids to school, we'll get the results. Well, my research proved that Aboriginal kids on the main are at school. And their attendance patterns are very regular for most. Individual families that have been affected by 250 years of terrible policy in this country and are suffering it, skew the data. So that Aboriginal kids who are suffering and haven't survived the situation and the genocide that took place can't move ahead and therefore don't attend school. Now, if you took those students away, we would get very equal numbers. And what does it change when we start talking like that? We stop blaming the victim. It's an easy system, I say, you know, and even my peers, Paul Hughes and others, back in the late 70s, early 80s, in a newspaper article, we'll get them back to school, everything will be right, got it wrong. It's not about school and it's not about going to school. And there's plenty of evidence and articles that would indicate that, and I raised some of those. All right, and the other thing that upsets me in terms of understanding a philosophy and where we're going, how can people know what works and then don't implement it? And we've had what works programs, we've had all sorts of things happening all the time. The interviews conducted by the research team during a review, this is the review that I undertook for 2004 for the review, and I looked at the Aboriginal education policy back in 96. The 96 policy, but the research was done in 2004. To the Aboriginal programs unit and more senior staff at the appropriate levels, positions of state structure, debt, no one person claimed ownership of the responsibility and accountability for the Aboriginal education policy. It was a situation of all care, no responsibility. You know, oh yeah, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. Oh no, it's not me, don't point the finger at me. And there's still that blame sharing. And we've got to be very careful of all smoke and mirrors. You know, white magic at work, underlying deficit belief, right? And not based on documented evidence. In search of the Holy Grail, when I was head of the Aboriginal Education Unit in 2004, and the first head of the Aboriginal Education Unit in 2004, every second week a senior bureaucrat would come down to me and say, Johnny, I've got the answer for Aboriginal people. I've been to a school, it's working, it's wonderful, it's fantastic, we should implement it. Well, most of those magic panaceas don't work. And people don't go past seeing one example or two examples, or don't go past pouring millions of dollars, as people like Telstra did, into programs that were subsequently unvalidated in review. The Stronger Smarter program, I was involved in a major review of that. No one read the review, but people continue to put millions and millions of dollars in it. Where are the results? They don't exist. Everyone's looking for this magic panacea, some sexy program that's going to get things. There are also, as I said, there's always been great teachers in the field doing great things, but it's not systemic. I talk about the equity conference in TAFE. Very subtle how they go about their business, this system. I had the job of doing a summary of equity groups right across TAFE, across New South Wales. And they all came in and they talked about their projects, shared things and everything else. And I had the job of reviewing the 2-day activity, just full of people doing special programs for Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, gifted, talented, women, non-English speaking background, you name it, they were all there. And guess what? It was a resounding success. Everyone was buoyed, everything's wonderful, but is it going to change the system? No. And I said that to them. I said, if I listen to you, everything's right in equity.
John,
in reality, what I witnessed were people who were overworked, over-dedicated, doing impossible things against impossible odds and getting results, but not duplicatable. And because the system says we pepper money out through the community, we make people, we overwork those people that are dedicated, and they start getting some little results, but then the funding stops. You know, oh, you've got to mainstream it, or, you know, something along those lines. The answer, money isn't a problem. I used to drive across the Harbour Bridge and look at Sydney Harbour and think there's enough money floating in Sydney Harbour to solve the Aboriginal problems of the world, probably. So money is not the problem. People are pouring lots and lots of money. They're not getting results. The answer is, in my belief and my finding, is developing what we need in terms of quality teachers. That's just an aside to show you that I was once a teacher. I had the best seasucker shirt and tie. I fancied myself in those days. But yeah, those kids are great. Then later, another slide of some other kids, and this is in Redfern. Now, how bloody silly am I? When I got offered, and it's another story I won't have time to tell, but when I was offered the position at Redfern, I could have gone anywhere in New South Wales. Yamba, Coast, all those, and I chose to go back to Redfern where I grew up because I wanted to make that difference. And the 3 R's of Indigenous education are basically respect, respect, and respect. And I liken this to understanding that teachers who are not Indigenous, it's a different sort of respect. Respect, when you're on a monocultural level, is this way, on equal ground. The respect I'm talking about is where we're on unequal ground and need to work across it. And that's a challenge, and but it's not insurmountable. Teaching is a relationship game, all right? I don't care who you are, you're in front of kids all the time. I always wanted to team teach, and when I was at Redfern, I was really keen. I could never get anyone to team teach with me. Maybe I wasn't a very good teacher, but teachers are also amazingly shy and insular. And putting another teacher in the classroom watching one another work is, well, in those days was extremely frowned upon. and not respected. You have to work at gaining respect with all good relationships. In Indigenous communities, respect has to indicate a willingness to work across cultural divides, accepting others' cultures and building on cross-cultural respect. Fundamentally, that's the basis in which we work. For most educationists, this is the start of the most important journey you will make in this program and perhaps in your teaching career. We know and have known for a long period of time what works, and that's a repetition of probably a summary of what we've talked about. There's the other class. That's the 6L. That was a vibrant class. They're really, they turned up in their school uniforms for the photographic opportunity. No. But this is Redfern. These are my kids. These are the kids I grew up with. These are kids, if I can't do something for them, who can? They were a great group of kids. And when I re-looked at this, there's some very genuine smiles. They like being in it, and I like being with them. Somehow, the most significant thing I heard, and haven't heard any different, is from every Aboriginal community person I have spoken to, no matter where they are in Australia, is they want their kids educated, but not at the expense of their Aboriginal cultures. So you don't do it and that's what's happening. Cultures aren't integrated. The process invented the PLPs, personal learning plans, and they're often called the Peter Brady kids. It was to counter the Peter Brady kids. Now, when I talk Peter Brady, you guys are thinking maybe the Brady Bunch. I'm not, because I might be a bit older than some of you, but some of you that are in my vintage, I'm talking about the Invisible Man on black and white TV, and his name was Peter Brady. What the research found is Aboriginal kids, by the time they leave stage 2 of schooling, within the first 5 years, they've switched off school because they're not engaged. And these kids sit as empty vessels in classrooms. When I've spoken to secondary teachers about these kids, I ask them about the three types of kids. The naughty kids, and they all know them, right? The naughty Aboriginal kids. The brainy Aboriginal kids, or the kids that are going through to Year 12. And I must say, the system supports kids that show that potential exceptionally well. Teachers and principals will bend over backwards to help those kids, but they're a minority. The bulk of Aboriginal kids are those that are disengaged. So they've come to school for the first 5 years, they've switched off by the end of stage 2, around when they're 10, 11, and they don't come back. And that's, if we're going to target, this is the group we've got. We've captured them. Preschools have captured them. But we don't build on it. And there's the different levels, and I talk about those that are engaged, those kids that come to school, me, for instance, I was always engaged. So I got most out of the school system. The disengaged, the Peter Brady kids I talked about, the invisible kids in classrooms, they've gone. And the unengaged are those kids that start off the naughty kids, and they continue. And these are the kids that skew the data around attendance, etc. These are the kids whose families are most, and generally intergenerational, are most affected by policies of the past 250 years. I talked about they fail in primary school and act out in secondary school. If you followed, as I did, the record cards of these kids, they become rap sheets by the time they're in year 7, 8 and 9. And one of them I read, and it was this one teacher, dominated. There were a couple other teachers on, but it was a rap sheet. And I just stopped and thought, is this a problem with the kid or a problem with the teacher? It was terrible. Quality teaching was not evident. I don't know whether people understand quality teaching, right? Basically, it's something that emerged at Newcastle with Jenny Gore and James Ladwick, involved from a Queensland set of circumstances, and basically it talks, and I'll show you a slide that'll introduce it. The answer isn't attendance, and that's been proven. What we need to do in terms of psychology and understanding is we need to take the flags off the poles, the Aboriginal murals off the walls, and embed them in the hearts, the souls and the minds of every classroom teacher. That's when we'll get change. That's when things will change. In terms of deficit, there's this enormous deficit over missions. Does anyone understand that history of the missions? Basically, Aboriginal people were herded up, put on missions or reserves, and they both are equally as bad as one another. They put on mission managers. At this time in our history, stolen generation was evident, and Aboriginal kids were being taken off parents, etc. The emergence of dog tags for those Aborigines who showed citizenship, got a certificate. We not so fondly refer to them as dog tags, so that we could go about the community as normal communities. We have stereotypes about mission kids, and when I did the research, the mission kids were generally demonised as bad and terrible. Well, the figures I came up with 10 students from particular missions, 5 had attendance levels of above 90%, and I'm not fond about attendance, but this is just one indicator. And 4 students accounted for slightly over 69% of total absences in the average attendance. So again, it was a small number of kids who were skewing the data, skewing the information, and there's a slide here that talks about the importance of that. Again, we've talked about these, and each one of the engaged, disengaged and engaged needs separate approaches to how we manage them, right? And I followed the 80-20 rule. 80% of our kids are disengaging, or roughly about that. If we spend the energy on that 80% who initially engage but then drop off, then we can get sort of backgrounds and understanding. Again, it's based on quality teaching. And if you don't know about quality teaching, these are the elements and they're the dimensions at the top. When they did research into quality teaching, 5 minutes. Oh, I need to go. Basically, the significance opponent was underrepresented. I'll skip through this and go to the next. Philosophically, the way I see Aboriginal education portrayed was done through RARC method painting, in traditional painting in Northern Territory. And no matter which of these paintings you look at, and the one there is a waterhole in Mulganara, and this one, which is about the sun rising on a new day, the overarching RARC approach is the pigmentation that our painting's drawn on. And our vision for Aboriginal kids must be the basis of that culture. And that fundamental right that before you can paint, you need to leave your culture there and then build on that. And basically that's what we were saying. The finding of the thesis, our ongoing research agenda must be dominated by attempts to understand how better we can encourage and train our current and future teachers and leaders effectively. I won't do that, grounding of the data. These are critical questions around qualities and lost philosophical souls. One of the biggest difficulties we face today and philosophically is identity. And as I pointed out in the early slide, most Aboriginal people live in urban environments and they're challenged consistently about their identity. Even amongst our own people, about prove that you're Aboriginal. And there's 3 decisions, 3 criteria for being Aboriginal in Australia. You have to have lineage, so you have to have background, genealogy. You must identify as an Aboriginal person, and you must be identified in the community as an Aboriginal person. That's causing chaos amongst our community and disruption. And it's something that in terms of philosophy we need to do. If we are going to develop our educational cluster, and in particular our philosophical views, we need to strengthen these concepts in contemporary Australia. And that's group orientation, consensus decision making, importance of elders, family sharing, conservation, future focus, spiritualisation, personal best practice, and nominalisation. Aboriginal people have got to feel normal, and they're cultured normal. Many of our urban Aboriginal people aren't in that situation, and it's the biggest test of our background. This is a work from Carlton in 2011, and she talks about culture dominates the contest between narratives. So basically she's saying defining oneself as an Aboriginal person is problematic. Some of our Aboriginal people are the most critics of Aboriginal people who through a stolen generation all of a sudden stumble across their Aboriginality. So they understand they've got background, but they don't meet the other two criteria and they've got to work through them. This is PB, and this is a program that I was running at Adamstown Public School. This is the program that I'm involved with. It's based on equitable outcomes for Aboriginal students, knowledge and understanding amongst all kids at the school, and how is empowering management and staff, facilitating learning, enabling growth and development, and being a positive role model of a contemporary Aboriginal person. I don't do smoking ceremonies. I don't play the didgeridoo. It wasn't part of our culture in New South Wales. Our musical instrument is hand clapping, clapsticks, boomerangs. Again, this is John greeting children, and with the hat, greeting children. That's obviously the park. That's me giving talks, and that's me sitting with a group of kids talking about their personal bests. So building up in them the esteem that trying your best is really important. If you don't get there, and I've got kindergarten kids telling me, what if I don't get my goals? I'd say to them, they said, well, you just try harder. Now there's a video, a 2-minute video. We've got 9:52 if you want questions. Yes. Well, we'll show the video, and there's Curry Claus. Merry Christmas, everyone. Watch this video.
The proud Wanneroo man has been at the forefront of education for 45 years, paving the way for future generations of teachers to come. He was the country's first Aboriginal TAFE principal and the state's first Indigenous director of Aboriginal education.
Helped write the first Aboriginal education policy, which is celebrated this year of 40 years.
Recently retiring from his role at the University of Newcastle, John was approached to volunteer at Adamstown Public School.
This was a perfect occasion to put theory into practice.
Known by these pupils as Uncle John, the elder was only meant to give up a day of his week, but he has relished the opportunity. You'll find John at the school most days, passing on his wisdom.
For many of us, he's the only Aboriginal elder we know.
He's been talking about the feedback, what I should do on my work to make it better and improve.
He helps us to our personal best.
And it's not just the students who have something to learn.
He works and mentors our teachers in regards to the quality teaching framework and embedding Indigenous perspective into our curriculum.
Today, John's career and lifetime love for education completed a full circle, the 68-year-old receiving a Nenga Award in Sydney for his work at Adamstown Public.
The awards that are being presented, I started when I was the Director of Aboriginal Education.
Jack Howard, NBN News.
Again, Merry Christmas. Questions?
Can you hear me on the mic? I've been chastened to use the mic this time. For those people who are online, thank you so much, Uncle John, for your illuminating speech. You've taken us through your whole life journey and really demonstrated how integral you've been to Aboriginal education in Australia and New South Wales in particular and your community. I'm really keen to come back to some of those key concepts that you wanted some clarity around and to sort of dig down into that philosophical dimension that we're all here to explore. But first, I'd like to take some questions from the audience. Has anyone got any questions that you'd like to open up the conversation with Uncle John? Inquiries? Queries?
Thank you for that talk. I'd just like to ask how it is that you reconcile, on the one hand, those aspects of being a good teacher that you recognize, you know, the sort of engagement, taking an interest in the students and the families, with what you also describe as the systemic problem of, you know, good teaching practice. How do you reconcile something that seems to be so individual, you know, to a teacher, on the one hand, with something that's systemic? You know, is that something that can be done systemically, when often it seems to boil down to the personality or the, you know, the character of a teacher?
Yeah, and one of the reasons I took the Adamstown volunteer role was to prove it can be done. So I'm there working, you know, engage with the kids, talking to them about personal best, and trying, in philosophical terms, understand urban Aboriginal life. And I'm working with the teachers there who have readily come on board when given the opportunity. So in one of the slides I may have discarded, we know the answers. I can deliver the box of goodies to the door of the teacher, but I can't get them to pick it up. Some teachers deny that they know anything about Aboriginal people. Yet, if you went to Newcastle University, I used to teach the subject, 3500, Aboriginal education. They've had it, but it's an easy way. The other thing that they are paranoid about, and they say, and I don't know whether this is an excuse or a reality, but they say they're too scared to do the wrong thing. And they don't understand. Well, me in that school, at lunchtime, I asked teachers to make personal interviews. So if they've got something they want to know or understand about culture they're not sure about, they can find time where we can personally do that, and it's confidential between us. And I've seen teachers at that school take it on. It's that slide that I talked about, all care, no responsibility. No one's getting picked up and saying, you know, losing their jobs or doing anything like that. And when I exited from the Department of Education as the Director of Aboriginal Education, I asked for a debrief with the Director General. And I said to him, you need to sack a principal. He said, what? You can't just do that. I said, well, if they're not getting results with Aboriginal kids, and, you know, they've gone through the path of, I said, we need to hold some people accountable. And, you know, never got to happen, never happened. And, you know, I don't necessarily want to hold the stick over their head. And I'm proving at this school that everything we talked about, we know what works. It's just implementing it.
Thank you, Uncle. Would anyone else like to expound or have a question about Uncle John's history? Yep.
Thank you, John. I'm just curious, as an early childhood educator, whether you think there's something that is going right in early childhood education and with early childhood's philosophical approach to education, but that isn't quite, gets lost in the transition to school. Because I know that a lot of early childhood educators, particularly really vibrant, thoughtful early childhood educators, really worry about the children in their care transitioning into school and for the formal education system. So is there something about, instead of pushing down a philosophy of education, we should be pushing up? Well, is there something in that transition that's particular that you're thinking about? Well,
you know, the example I used is, you know, these Aboriginal kids that are full of culture, full of life, full of energy, full of knowing, get switched off. So yes, there's really good things happening in early childhood, and it's one of the government pushes. It's the closing the gap, and in reality, there's lots we can learn from that process. And, you know, it's not just a minding centre until they go to the real school. There's good things happening, and they're all play-based, is the prior. And I'm seeing that at Adamstown. They're picking up play-based as a clear directive.
And it's on-country early childhood as well. There are some on-country early childhood where elders take the children out and to tell the stories and learn about country.
Yep.
But I've never heard of that in a school yet. So there are things to learn, yes. Thank you.
Kia ora, John. Tufula Stalin is my name. My area of interest is Pasifika education, and I very much relate to your presentation today, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
You covered quite a bit, but you came down to those key things like you talked about genuine engagement with Indigenous students, very much aligned with your PhD study. I'm interested really when you talk about, it really comes down to the respect and building relationship. We're very much sort of doing the same thing, but how deep did you go in terms of changing the thinking of those teachers and educators, particularly when you're coming from your own perspective as an Indigenous expert, myself as well as a Pacifica expert, working with those who haven't got the kind of perspective and a deep philosophical views of the culture that you have. How deep did you go, and how can we actually make a real difference? Because the way I'm coming from, based on my own background and the deep meaning of respect and building relationship, may be very, very different from those we're trying to educate. We're trying to support in terms of getting right down there and helping Indigenous students to make that real difference.
Yeah, it is a challenge making it systemic. When I received that award, the president of the Teachers Federation was at the awards, and he left early, and he caught my eye, and I'd worked with him years ago. And, you know, he said, "G'day, John, how you going?" I said, "I need to talk to you," taking the opportunity when I can, because I want the Teacher Federation to, and the Teachers Federation is only around the corner. Maybe I can drop in on him while I'm here. But trying to get teachers to sign on, the back of my mind, I'm thinking if I can get Federation behind it, and they've been extremely supportive of Aboriginal education, extremely supportive. What I'm thinking of, getting teachers to sign on as partners in the process, and at the back of my mind, I'm thinking of Magpie, the black and white right part, so we're the black part, they're the white part, primarily. And that they wear those badges, and you know, they sign up to a set of goals or ethical considerations. You know, they're part of that. So I'm looking at ways of doing that. I was so surprised how quickly the staff at the school that I was at moved. Once they felt they were in a safe environment, and that confidentiality is an important part of it. And to my own community, I've said time and time again, teachers will make mistakes. I said, don't kick them in the guts. Pick them up, dust them off, and put them in the right direction. And, you know, so long as it's not vindictive in terms of the nature of the mistake, but we've got to work with them, and the community's got to work with them. But that involves schools and communities getting closer together than they are now.
I really like that idea of the magpie. Did everybody catch that, the idea of the magpie? Yeah. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that? Does anyone else have a question? Would you like to elaborate on the idea of magpie? We'll have one minute just so that you can explain this idea of partnership, because I think that sort of drills down to the nature of relationships, respect, working together. What do you mean by it?
Well, I'll preface it by saying what happens when we don't work together. I've been in battle with my DELs as a member of the AECG at a local level asking for data about how we're going with Aboriginal kids. They refused to give it to me. I've gone to the executive director and he said, I tell you what, John, I'll give you the link on file where you can write in and ask for the data. And then I said to him, bullshit. I said, we're in partnership. You hold all the data and we don't know it. And we're supposed to be giving you advice. And schools are persistent. And, you know, I've gone on don't know how many selection panels, and it's evidence-based. Schools, teachers are being demanded to be evidence-based, follow the data, do all those sorts of things. When I ask for it, oh no, we can't do that. The Magpie, just getting people to sign up to a conviction about what we're on about and the things that we talked about, this background, we know what works, getting them to sign that. And I suppose that's the equality, the ethical. And when they can sue one another, they know that they're on level grounds.
Thank you. Thank you, Uncle John. Can we bring our hands together to thank our Keynote?